The Universal Archive of Cultural Studies hung suspended in space like a crystalline snowflake, its transparent halls filled with the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. Dr. Thomas Reed adjusted his research tablet as he made his way through the xenoarchaeology wing, his footsteps echoing off the polished floors. After 15 years of studying alien civilizations, he thought nothing could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. Fascinating, came a melodious voice from behind him. Your species documents pair bonding rituals with such precision. Thomas turned to find himself face to face with a tall, graceful figure. Her skin had a subtle iridescent quality that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue, and her eyes held an inner light that seemed to pulse with curiosity. She wore the distinctive robes of the Centaurian Science Academy, marked with the insignia of a senior researcher. I am Naira Tal, she introduced herself, holding up a data crystal containing human sociological studies. I must admit, I find your species' approach to relationship formation quite perplexing. Thomas smiled, used to alien confusion about human customs. Dr. Thomas Reed, he replied. And what exactly perplexes you about our approach? Naira's bioluminescent markings flickered in what he recognized as amusement. You have entire academic disciplines dedicated to studying pair bonding. Psychological analyses, sociological surveys, biological studies. My people simply know when it is time to form a connection. We feel the resonance, and that is all. Resonance? Thomas asked, his researcher's curiosity piqued. A biochemical and empathic harmony between compatible individuals, Naira explained, her head tilted slightly. It is pure, efficient, without need for what you call dating or courtship. She pronounced the words carefully, as if they were exotic terms from a dead language. Thomas found himself drawn into the discussion. But surely there's more to your relationships than just biochemistry? Of course, Naira responded, her markings shifting to a contemplative pattern. We form deep bonds, but we do not complicate the process with uncertainty. When we know, we know. She paused, studying him with those luminous eyes. Your species seems to embrace uncertainty, even celebrate it. These texts speak of butterflies in the stomach and racing hearts as positive experiences. Most curious. As they talked, other researchers passed by, some casting curious glances at the unusual pair, a human and a Centaurian, deep in discussion about relationships of all things. But Thomas hardly noticed, fascinated by Naira's perspective. Would you be interested in collaborating on a comparative study? He found himself asking. Your insights could provide valuable perspective on human relationship dynamics. Naira's markings brightened. A formal research project? How very human. Her tone carried warm amusement. But yes, I would find that most enlightening. Though I warn you, my questions may seem rather direct by your standards. I think I can handle direct, Thomas replied, trying to ignore the strange flutter in his chest when she smiled, a gesture she must have learned to use around humans, since Centaurians typically expressed emotions through their bioluminescence. As they began setting up regular research meetings, neither of them fully realized they were about to become their own case study in interspecies relationships. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Their first official research session set the tone for what was to come. Naira arrived with a list of questions that made Thomas alternatively blush and laugh. Your species intentionally creates situations of romantic uncertainty, she asked, her markings pulsing with bewilderment. These mixed signals and playing hard to get, they serve a purpose? Thomas found himself defending customs he'd never really thought about before. It's not always intentional, he explained. Sometimes people are just uncertain about their feelings, or afraid of rejection. Afraid? Naira's markings flickered rapidly. But how can you be afraid of something that simply is or is not? This is like being afraid of gravity. The comparison made Thomas pause. I suppose when you put it that way, it does seem irrational. But humans often are. We feel our way through things, sometimes messily, but that process of discovery is part of what makes connections meaningful for us. As their research progressed, Thomas noticed subtle changes in their interactions. Naira began adopting more human gestures, while he found himself becoming more attuned to the subtle patterns of her bioluminescence. Their discussions frequently ran over their scheduled time, veering from academic analysis into personal territories. One evening, as they reviewed their research notes, Naira suddenly asked, "Thomas, are you aware that your peripheral circulatory system shows increased activity whenever we work together?" The direct question caught him off guard. What? Your cheeks flush, your pupils dilate, your heart rate increases, she stated matter-of-factly. In human terms, these are indicators of attraction, are they not? Thomas felt those very symptoms intensifying under her steady gaze. They can be, he admitted. Though sometimes they're just signs of embarrassment. Like now? Naira's markings rippled with what he now recognized as gentle teasing. How fascinating that embarrassment and attraction share physical markers in humans. No wonder your courtship rituals are so complex. The news spread through the Universal Archive faster than a quantum transmission, a human and a Centaurian, conducting relationship research together. It wasn't technically against any regulations, but it certainly raised eyebrows across multiple species. Director Veraxis, the archive's stern Rigelian administrator, called Thomas into his office after their research had been ongoing for 3 standard months. His crystalline form caught the starlight streaming through the viewport, casting fractured rainbows across the room. "Dr. Reed," he began, his voice resonating like wind through crystal. "Your collaboration with researcher Tal has attracted attention. The Centaurian Science Academy has expressed concerns about potential bias in your research methodology." Thomas maintained his professional composure, though his heart raced. "Our methodology is sound, Director. We're documenting everything according to standard xenosociological protocols." "Indeed." Veraxis's crystalline structure shifted slightly. "And the fact that you've been observed sharing meals together in the archive's atrium? Attending cultural exhibitions as a pair? Are these also part of your research protocols?" Before Thomas could respond, a familiar melodious voice came from the doorway. "They are, actually." Naira stood there, her bioluminescent patterns radiating confidence. "We're conducting immersive experiential research. How better to understand human relationship dynamics than to engage in their social customs?" Thomas felt a surge of warmth at her intervention, followed by concern about her career. "Naira, you don't have to." "I believe I do," she interrupted, entering the office fully. "Director, our research has already yielded fascinating insights into both species' approaches to relationship formation. The Centaurian reliance on biochemical resonance isn't as foolproof as we've always assumed, while the human emphasis on emotional connection has measurable benefits we hadn't considered." Veraxis's crystalline form vibrated with what might have been amusement or annoyance. "And your own biochemical readings, Researcher Tal? Are they part of your data set?" Naira's markings pulsed with what Thomas now recognized as determination. "They are. Including the fact that I'm experiencing resonance with Dr. Reed, despite all previous assumptions about cross-species compatibility." The revelation hung in the air like a suspended stellar explosion. Thomas turned to her, stunned. In all their discussions about Centaurian biology, she'd never mentioned this. "That's impossible," Veraxis stated flatly. "Centaurian resonance requires specific biochemical markers that humans don't possess." "Apparently not," Naira replied, her markings now pulsing with a pattern Thomas had never seen before. "We've documented the readings thoroughly. It seems human biochemistry can adapt in ways we never anticipated. Their emotional capacity appears to create alternative pathways for resonance." Thomas found his voice. "Director, What began as academic research has led to discoveries that could revolutionize our understanding of cross-species relationships. Isn't that exactly what the archive was established to facilitate? The director's crystalline surface rippled as he processed this. "Submit your findings for peer review," he finally said. "But be aware that both your species authorities will be watching this development closely." After they left the director's office, Thomas and Naira walked in silence through the archive's sprawling corridors. Finally, he spoke. "Why didn't you tell me about the resonance?" Naira's markings shifted to a softer pattern. "I was uncertain. A very human feeling, I've discovered. I needed to understand it first, to document and analyze it. Very Centaurian of me, wouldn't you say?" Her attempt at humor carried an undercurrent of vulnerability he'd never heard from her before. "How long have you known?" he asked softly. "Since our third research session," she admitted. "When you spent an hour explaining why humans write poetry about unrequited love. Your passion for understanding, your emotional depth, it triggered something in my biochemistry that shouldn't have been possible." Thomas stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "And you spent all this time studying it?" "Of course." Her markings pulsed with what might have been embarrassment. "I am a researcher. I needed to be certain, to understand the mechanism. It's not just emotional attraction, Thomas. My biology is literally adapting to compatibility with yours. It's unprecedented." Around them, other archive researchers passed by, pretending not to stare at the unusual pair. Thomas was acutely aware of their audience, but for once, he didn't care. "So what does this mean for our research?" "It means," Naira said, her markings beginning to glow with increasing intensity, "that we need to expand our methodology. If I'm experiencing biochemical adaptation, it's possible you are too. We should conduct more, thorough investigations." The way she said "thorough" made Thomas's pulse quicken. "That sounds like it might compromise our scientific objectivity." "Perhaps," she agreed, her markings now pulsing in a rhythm that seemed to match his heartbeat. "But isn't that what humans do? Let their hearts guide their discoveries? Now you're just using our cultural differences to justify breaking protocol," Thomas said, but he was smiling. "Is it working?" Her own smile, once learned but now natural, lit up her face. "Completely." Their conversation was interrupted by the archive's general announcement system, calling all researchers to an emergency assembly. As they made their way to the Grand Hall, Thomas realized their private revelation was about to become very public. But looking at Naira, seeing the way her bioluminescence danced with both nervousness and determination, he knew they were past the point of hiding. The Grand Hall of the Universal Archive hummed with tension as representatives from a dozen species gathered for the emergency assembly. The massive chamber, with its holographic displays of swirling galaxies overhead, had never felt so small to Thomas. High Commissioner Lysandra of Earth stood at the central podium, her silver hair and ceremonial blue uniform a stark contrast to the Centaurian High Council's shifting colors. Beside her, Chief Scientist Raval of Centauri, Naira's direct superior, emanated waves of disapproval through his bioluminescent patterns. "This assembly has been called," Lysandra began, her voice carrying through the hall, "to address an unprecedented situation. Our routine review of archive research has revealed evidence of potentially dangerous cross-species biological adaptation." Thomas felt Naira stiffen beside him. They sat in the front row, as requested, feeling like specimens under a microscope. "Dangerous?" Naira stood, her voice clear and steady. "With respect, High Commissioner, our research demonstrates quite the opposite. The adaptability shown suggests new possibilities for interspecies cooperation and understanding." Chief Scientist Raval's patterns flashed with warning colors. "Researcher Tal, your objectivity is clearly compromised. The biochemical readings we've reviewed indicate your resonance patterns have been fundamentally altered. This could have severe implications for your long-term health. Or, Thomas interjected, standing beside Naira, it could indicate that our species are more compatible than anyone imagined. The human capacity for emotional bonding appears to create pathways that facilitate biological adaptation. The hall erupted in murmurs and bioluminescent flickers as various species discussed this possibility in their own ways. High Commissioner Lysandra raised her hand for silence. Dr. Reed, while your hypothesis is interesting, we cannot ignore the potential risks. The Centaurian resonance process is deeply tied to their biological functions. Any disruption could be catastrophic. If I may, a new voice cut through the debate. Dr. Helena Rodriguez, Earth's leading xenobiologist, stepped forward from the audience. Her dark eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. I've reviewed their research data. The adaptation patterns we're seeing aren't just remarkable, they're revolutionary. Human emotional bonding appears to create quantum-level changes in cellular structure that mirror Centaurian resonance patterns. Chief Scientist Rivales' colors shifted to skeptical patterns. Impossible. Resonance is unique to our species. Was unique, Dr. Rodriguez corrected. Just as humans have historically adapted to new environments and challenges, we may be witnessing the next step in our species' evolution, the ability to form deep biological connections with other sentient beings. Thomas felt Naira's hand slip into his, a very human gesture she'd adopted. Her touch sent tingles of energy through his skin, a sensation that had grown stronger over time. If I may speak, Naira addressed the assembly, her markings pulsing with determination. We Centaurians pride ourselves on following the pure logic of resonance, believing it eliminates the uncertainty of emotional attachment. But through my research, and yes, my personal experience, I've discovered that emotion itself can create its own form of resonance. She turned to face the gathered representatives directly. My readings aren't showing degradation or danger. They're showing evolution. Adaptation. The very qualities that humanity has always excelled at are now offering new possibilities for genuine interspecies connection. And what of the children? Another voice called out from the assembly. Have you considered the implications for reproduction? Thomas felt heat rise to his face, but Naira remained composed. Actually, we have preliminary data suggesting that the same adaptive mechanisms could potentially allow for. Enough. Chief Scientist Rivales' interruption came with a blast of warning colors. This goes beyond research. You're suggesting fundamental changes to our species' biological imperatives. No, Thomas spoke up, squeezing Naira's hand. We're suggesting that our species' differences aren't barriers, they're bridges. Human emotional capacity combined with Centaurian resonance creates something entirely new. Something that could change everything we think we know about interspecies relationships. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward again, her scientific enthusiasm obvious. The implications go far beyond just humans and Centaurians. If we can understand how this adaptation works, it could open doors for other species as well. Imagine a galaxy where biological compatibility isn't a barrier to genuine connection. The assembly erupted in discussion again, some species clearly intrigued by the possibility, others visibly disturbed. High Commissioner Lysandra consulted quietly with her advisors before addressing the hall again. Given the potential significance of these findings, we propose the formation of a joint research committee to study this phenomenon properly. Under controlled conditions, she added, with a pointed look at Thomas and Naira. Agreed, Chief Scientist Rivales' patterns had shifted to reluctant acceptance. But researcher Tall and Dr. Reed will need to submit to regular medical monitoring. We cannot risk. With all due respect, Naira interrupted, her markings pulsing with an intensity that made several nearby Centaurians step back. We are not test subjects. We are researchers who have discovered something extraordinary. Yes, we will continue to document and study what's happening, but we will not be treated as specimens in our own research. Thomas felt a surge of pride and affection as she stood her ground. The emotion must have triggered something in their connection, because Naira's markings suddenly shifted to patterns he'd never seen before, creating gasps among the Centaurian delegation. "What's happening?" Lysandra asked, alarmed. "Impossible," Raval whispered, his own patterns showing shock. "She's displaying royal resonance patterns, something only seen in our ancient historical records. Patterns said to appear when our species first achieved sentience and formed its first deep bonds." The Ancient Studies wing of the Universal Archive had been transformed into a temporary research facility. Holographic displays showed the swirling patterns of Naira's bioluminescence alongside historical records of Centaurian royal resonance. Thomas watched as xenoarchaeologists and biologists from both species worked together, their excitement palpable. "These patterns haven't been seen in over 10,000 years, Dr. Rodriguez explained, manipulating a 3D model of the luminescent sequences. "They appeared during the First Awakening, when Centaurians developed their higher consciousness and began forming complex social bonds." Naira stood in a scanning chamber, her patterns still displaying the impossible ancient rhythms. "Our histories speak of a time before pure logic," she said, her voice thoughtful. "When our species balanced emotional connection with biological resonance. We thought those stories were myths." Thomas approached the chamber, and immediately the patterns intensified. The scanning equipment registered a surge of quantum-level activity between them. "It's like they're speaking to each other on a subatomic level," one of the human scientists muttered in awe. "More than speaking," Chief Scientist Raval admitted, his own patterns showing reluctant wonder. "These readings suggest a form of quantum entanglement we've never seen before. Their cellular structures are literally harmonizing." The discovery had prompted an emergency session of the Galactic Council. Representatives from dozens of species arrived at the archive daily, all eager to understand what this could mean for their own possibilities of connection. But for Thomas and Naira, the implications were becoming intensely personal. "The royal patterns," Thomas asked during a quiet moment between tests, "what exactly did they mean in ancient Centaurian culture?" Naira's markings shifted to softer, more intimate patterns. "According to our oldest records, they appeared in pairs who achieved the deepest possible resonance. Pairs who could." She paused, searching for the right words, "share consciousness, in a way. Feel each other's emotions, know each other's thoughts. Is that what's happening with us?" Thomas felt a flutter of both excitement and nervousness. "I think it's something new," Naira replied. "The ancient patterns are there, yes, but they're interacting with your human biology in ways we never imagined possible. It's as if your species' capacity for emotional connection is awakening something dormant in mine." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the medical bay. Dr. Rodriguez had made a breakthrough in analyzing their cellular changes. "Look at this," she said excitedly, pointing to a holographic display of their cellular structures. "The human capacity for neuroplasticity, our ability to form new neural pathways, is somehow facilitating the development of new biological channels for Centaurian resonance. It's not just adaptation, it's evolution in real time." "But that's not the most remarkable part," another scientist added, manipulating the display. "The quantum entanglement between them is creating a feedback loop. Each new connection strengthens both their biology in different ways. Thomas's cells are developing primitive bioluminescent capabilities, while Naira's emotional processing centers are becoming more human-like." Chief Scientist Raval studied the data with intense focus. "This suggests the potential for true hybridization. Not just cultural exchange, but biological synthesis between our species." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. Hybridization between species had been theoretically possible but never successfully achieved. The genetic and biological barriers had always proven too great. "It's already happening," Dr. Rodriguez said softly, pulling up another set of scans. "Look at the molecular structure of their reproductive cells. They're adapting to each other, finding ways to become compatible that should be impossible." Thomas felt Naira's hand slip into his again, that now familiar surge of energy passing between them. Perhaps impossible is just another word for unexplored, she said, her markings pulsing with the ancient royal patterns. The revelation sparked a new wave of ethical debates and scientific inquiry. Some saw it as a threat to species purity, while others recognized it as an unprecedented opportunity for genuine interspecies understanding. High Commissioner Lysandra called an emergency meeting with Earth's Scientific Council. The implications go far beyond just humans and Centaurians, she argued. If we can understand how this adaptation works, it could revolutionize our approach to interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. But as the political and scientific communities grappled with the larger implications, Thomas and Naira found themselves facing more immediate concerns. The intensity of their connection was growing stronger each day, bringing with it new challenges and discoveries. "I can feel your thoughts sometimes," Naira admitted one evening as they stood in the archive's observation dome, watching the stars. "Not clearly, but impressions, emotions, fragments of ideas." Thomas nodded. "I've been experiencing something similar. Colors in my mind that I know are your patterns, feelings that don't quite feel like my own." He turned to look at her, marveling at how her bioluminescence seemed to dance in harmony with his heartbeat. "Does it scare you?" "Terrify me," she admitted, her patterns showing a vulnerability she once would have hidden. "And excite me. We're becoming something entirely new, Thomas. Not just you and me, but what we represent. The possibility that different species can truly connect, truly understand each other." Their private moment was interrupted by urgent messages from both their superiors. New data had emerged from the latest round of tests, data that would force both their species to confront their preconceptions about biology, emotion, and the very nature of connection itself. The Universal Archive's Grand Observation Dome had been transformed into a ceremonial hall for what many were calling the most significant diplomatic event in centuries. Representatives from over 50 species gathered beneath the stars, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of galactic life. At the center of it all stood Thomas and Naira, their connection now visible to everyone through the synchronized pulses of bioluminescence they both displayed. Thomas's newly developed ability to emit light patterns had shocked the scientific community, but it was nothing compared to what the latest data revealed. Dr. Rodriguez stood before the assembled dignitaries, presenting their findings. "What we're witnessing isn't just adaptation or evolution, it's the emergence of an entirely new paradigm for interspecies connection. The quantum entanglement between Dr. Reed and researcher Tal has created a template for biological synthesis that could theoretically work between any sentient species." The hall erupted in murmurs and various forms of communication as the implications sank in. High Commissioner Lysandra stepped forward. "We've already received requests from 17 different species pairs wanting to participate in the new research program. The potential for genuine cross-species understanding is unprecedented." "Understanding is just the beginning," Chief Scientist Raval added, his patterns showing excitement rather than his usual reservation. "The ancient royal resonance patterns we've observed suggest our ancestors knew something we had forgotten, that true connection transcends biological barriers." Thomas felt a gentle pressure in his mind, Naira's thoughts brushing against his own. Their ability to share consciousness had strengthened to the point where words were becoming optional between them. He could feel her joy, her nervousness, her hope for the future they were helping to create. "We stand at a crossroads," Naira addressed the assembly, her voice carrying the weight of history. "For too long, we've defined ourselves by our differences, human emotion versus Centaurian resonance, biological imperatives versus conscious choice. But what we've discovered is that these aren't opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a greater whole." Thomas stepped forward to join her. "The quantum entanglement we've experienced isn't just changing us, it's revealing possibilities that have always existed. Humans have always sought emotional connections that transcend physical boundaries. Centaurians have always known that biology and consciousness are intertwined. Together, we're proving that these truths are universal. Dr. Rodriguez activated a new holographic display, showing the latest scans of their cellular structure. The adaptation continues to evolve. Their DNA is literally rewriting itself, creating new patterns that combine the best aspects of both species. And most remarkably, these changes appear to be stable and potentially hereditary. The implications of that last statement rippled through the assembly. The possibility of viable hybrid offspring between different species had been a dream of xenobiologists for generations. But the physical changes are just the beginning, Naira continued, her patterns synchronizing with Thomas's emerging bioluminescence. The emotional and consciousness aspects of our connection suggest possibilities we're only beginning to understand. The ability to truly share thoughts, feelings, memories, not just between individuals, but potentially between entire species. High Commissioner Lysandra stepped forward again. In light of these discoveries, the Galactic Council has approved the establishment of a new department within the Universal Archive, the Institute for Interspecies Synthesis. Dr. Reed, Researcher Tull, we would like you to lead it. Thomas and Naira shared a look, their connection humming with shared purpose. They had moved beyond the need for verbal agreement, but for the benefit of the assembly, Thomas spoke. We would be honored. But with one condition. Name it, Lysandra replied. The research must be voluntary, driven by genuine connection rather than just scientific curiosity. What we've discovered isn't just a biological process to be replicated, it's a pathway to genuine understanding between species. It requires both emotional openness and biological compatibility. You can't force either. The assembly hall fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. This wasn't just about scientific discovery anymore, it was about fundamentally changing how different species could relate to and understand each other. Agreed, Chief Scientist Rivales' patterns showed solemn approval. We've already seen interest from numerous species pairs who have formed emotional bonds but lacked the biological means to fully express them. This could be the key to unlocking genuine galactic community. As the formal proceedings concluded and the various representatives began discussing the practical implications, Thomas and Naira slipped away to their favorite spot in the archive, a quiet alcove overlooking the spiral arm of the galaxy they called home. Can you feel it? Naira asked, her patterns merging with his in a dance of light that would have been impossible months ago. All the possibilities, all the connections waiting to be discovered? Thomas nodded, letting their shared consciousness flow freely between them. It's like the universe was waiting for us to remember that differences don't have to be barriers. They can be bridges. Their bioluminescent patterns swirled together, creating new formations that combined human passion with Centaurian resonance. In their joined light, they could see the future they were helping to create, a galaxy where understanding transcended physical form, where connection knew no biological bounds, where love itself could evolve beyond the constraints of single species. They had started as researchers studying relationship dynamics. They had become pioneers of a new way of being. And as their light danced among the stars, they knew this wasn't an ending, but a beginning, the first step toward a future where the boundaries between species were not walls, but doorways to greater understanding.